The freshmen line up before the gigantic goddess statue, waiting for fire, water, earth, or wind to answer their call. The instructor tells the legend of how Gaia blessed weak humans with the four elements, and the hall fills with hope. One by one, students awaken their magic. Neil even stuns everyone by pulling in two elements, and the nobles start cheering. Then all eyes turn to our MC Lewis, and nothing comes. Louis feels his mind being squeezed, like an unseen chain is trying to snap his will. He screams, breaks free, and four colors rush to him. Yet every time he reaches out, the lights slip away. The instructor only smirks, confident the confinement circle and a magic forbidden orb under Louis's tile will crush him in silence. But Kara senses the trap. Louis shatters the tile, exposes the orb, and a four-color vortex erupts. Even the principal steps in, because what's waking inside Louis is not normal. And when the power finally bursts, ice and wind explode, turning the temple into a frozen nightmare. Well, how did this happen? One morning, a large crowd of applicants gathers at the entrance of the Candria Arcanist Academy. But Louis isn't surprised by this because he expected such from one of the Empire's top Arcanist training schools. When he hears someone scream his name, he turns back and sees his parents panting from exhaustion and complaining about how he left them in the dust on their way to the academy. Out of concern, his mom, La Ciela, asks if he brought his ID and warns him to make sure no one notices his hair color, but he assures her that he's fully equipped with his ID and hair dye. However, she's still very anxious and suggests that he shouldn't go through with the exam because she heard that some examinees die during these exams, which means that someone could target him because of his hair color. His dad, Julian, calmly places his hand on her shoulder and tells her that the only way to solve Louis's problem is with magic. He also explains that the academy is the only academy in the Northern Empire where commoners can take the exam. The Candria Arcanist Academy is the premier institution that was established by the Candria royal family, and one of the 10 great academies that has the Empire's strongest Grand Masters as teachers. Some of the graduates from this academy over the past 10 years became guardians, even those who didn't have noble backgrounds. In light of this, Julian suggests that it's the perfect environment for Louis to learn magic, and Louis confirms that he's right before telling his mom with fire in his eyes that he has to become a Grand Master so that he can obtain ownership of the orphanage from the church. Hearing this, La Ciela is stunned, but she suddenly starts crying while calling herself a terrible mother for making him worry about the facility and not being able to cure his rampage. Julian calms her down by reminding her that she's already doing a lot by taking care of so many children, and Louis adds to that by thanking her for being the sole reason he's alive. In his previous life, he dreamed of becoming the world's strongest warrior, but that was impossible because he had severe asthma, which made him unable to live without a respirator. His parents started hating him for costing them a lot of money, but he still didn't lose his passion for martial arts, and soon that passion bore fruit as he was able to become a scholar researching martial arts theory. His research greatly contributed to the evolution of the fighting industry and the revival of martial arts, but things went south when a certain scholar stole his thesis and accused him of being a thief. Even though he's a sickly cripple who clearly can't pull off a heist, his parents still gave up on him and pulled out his respirator. In his final moments, Louis wished to have a healthy body and a family that loves him in the next life. He then wished to have his own life before finally passing on. In the year 90 of the Saint calendar, he reincarnated in the town of Mantia, and the first thing he saw was La Ciela with a concerned look as she noticed the unique colors of his hair and eyes. As he wondered where he was, La Ciela thought that the child could bring disaster to the facility, but she picked him up and said she can't leave him because he's innocent. She then named him Louis, and he felt content that his wishes of having a healthy body and a family that loves him both came true. Back in the present, a random examinee calls La Ciela a commoner while shoving her harshly to the ground, leaving Julian and Louis shocked and concerned. They immediately rush to check on her, but the bully starts mouthing off about how Louis is building castles in the sky by dreaming of becoming a Grand Master despite being a commoner. This ticks off Louis, so when the bullies insult them even more, he stands up with vengeance in his eyes and prepares to fight them. However, Julian holds back his clenched fist and tells him to focus on the exam at the moment. La Ciela then reminds him that he promised not to cause any trouble at school, and this leaves him speechless. After finally calming down, he apologizes to his mom for losing his temper, but this disappoints the noble brutes, so they leave to get their numbers for the exam. As they walk away, some knights tell everyone around to make way because Lord Cain is coming through. Then enters Cain, the heir of the Aranka family, and the people are absolutely dazed by his charming and sparkling appearance. As Louis stares at the bully and Cain, he swears to himself that he'll show these nobles who's boss. When La Ciela starts feeling uneasy again, he holds her hand and assures her that he'll definitely pass the exam. He goes even further by declaring that he'll become a Grand Master, and this declaration makes Cain stare at him. As the bullies continue to make a jest of him, Louis runs forward and swears to himself that in this life, he'll become the strongest and protect what's dear to him. While watching him, La Ciela asks Julien if Louis will be fine because only 20 to 30 people pass the exam each year, and that year there were 20,000 applicants. Julien assures her that he'll be fine because Louis is more stubborn than anyone, and once he decides to do something, he charges ahead without caring about what others think. He then reminds her that it's their job to support him as a family, and she replies that he's right. Meanwhile, Louis arrives at the exam hall and wonders why everyone around is older than him. Just then, the supervisor of the exam and principal of the academy, Aronian, announces the start of the exam while some suited officials stand in front of the examinees. Louis remembers the fact that in this world, the practitioners of arcane martial arts called martial arcanist are ranked into 6 categories. The saint at the very top, followed by the sage, then the grandmaster, master, fighter, and apprentice. Since the grandmaster is third from the top, it's the privileged class of the world. Principal Aronian informs the examinees that the first test is to climb the stairs guarded by their seniors, adding that the first exam passes are placed right behind them. He further reveals that there are 1,000 total exam passes, and only those who obtain them can participate in the next test. Finally, he discloses that the exam ends once the passes run out, and then tells them to begin the exam. Some examinees feel the exam is a piece of cake, so they rush forward at one of the seniors, but the senior unleashes an ominous aura while welcoming them to hell. He then releases a powerful magical force field that forces them to stop, and after it knocks them out, it's announced that they're all disqualified. While everyone tries to process what they just witnessed, 2 examinees identify the senior as Lord Sheath, the finance minister's son, and the top scorer at the previous year's exam. Suddenly, Louis walks forward while explaining to everyone that Sheath simply released his aura to intimidate them, and anyone weak-willed wouldn't be surprised to pass out from fear. As Louis stands before Sheath, he praises him for having backbone, but states that there's no room for commoners, causing Louis to get angry. He swears that he'll make Louis kneel, and releases a huge wave of aura which makes the other examinees start coughing out their guts. However, Louis stands unfazed, and remembers all the training he's done so far which makes him confident in his abilities. When Sheath fires a magic blast at him, he dodges and charges forward with his fist clenched. The other examinees look on with their jaws dropped to the floor as Louis scares Sheath by feigning a punch, and they begin to wonder how he pulled it off without using magic. When Louis collects the exam pass, Sheath tries to punch him, but he blocks with his own hardened fist, leaving him shocked that the commoner countered his attack without magic. Principal Aronian stops Sheath from attacking further, and reminds him that the academy treats all examinees equally regardless of their status. As they bow in submission to him, he congratulates Louis for passing the exam, but then points out that his hair color is concerning. Louis is stunned, but when Aronian starts to wonder if Louis's eye color is unusual as well, he makes his eyes gray and shows it to him. However, his tricks don't fool the principal, as he places his hand on Louis's shoulder and promises to prepare a special potion that'll hide his unique traits if he's admitted. Louis feels that Aronian may be plotting something, but he knows his first priority is passing the exam, so he tells him he's going to prepare for the second test. As he walks away, Sheath stares at him angrily, and he wonders why the principal intervened in an exam for the first time in order to protect a mere commoner. While boiling in anger, he swears that he'll never forget the name Louis. Much later, the examinees who passed the first test arrive at the academy's second training ground, where they're told to wait before the second exam can begin. As Louis watches the other examinees chat, he notices that most of the 1,000 examinees left are nobles who received elite education, and there are almost no commoners left. Just then, Sheath bumps into him while passing by with his comrades, and he warns Louis that no one's going to be there to help him the next time they face each other. At first, Louis is unbothered, but when one of Sheath's pals claims that he'd have been disqualified without the principal's help, he smirks while calling them complete idiots. As Sheath angrily stares back at him, he tells them straight up that the Grandmaster has better judgment than them. Sheath gets so triggered that he threatens to knock him out, but Louis' rage baits him even further with a nonchalant smile. Now boiling in anger, Sheath tries to punch him, but Louis counters using a 2-finger martial arts technique. When Sheath notices his body can no longer move, Louis reveals that the move is called Meridian Severance and sends him flying using another special combat technique called Spiral Point Strike, leaving his 2 minions in a state of shock. Sheath's loud impact with the ground draws the attention of all the other examinees in the room, and he tries to catch his breath. When his pals check on him, he tells them that he can't feel his arm or move it properly, and swears to report Louis for using poison on him. However, Louis denies the poison accusations by revealing that he used martial arts, and claims that although his mom asked him to hold back, he'd been pushed to his limits. While preparing to land another hit on Sheath, he states that the only people who can hit others are those prepared to be hit themselves. But Kane stops him, and reminds him that he could be disqualified since they're currently in the middle of an exam. As Louis walks away, Sheath's goons start yelling at Kane for interfering, so he reminds them who he is, causing them to shiver in fear. Sheath decides to walk away, but he remarks that commoners and nobles are both trash. As the failed bullies leave, Louis watches them from the wall he's resting on and concludes that all nobles are the same as they all use their status to do whatever they want. Kane approaches him and commends him for being strong and courageous before offering to form a team with him. However, some fangirls interrupt their conversation by offering to team up with Kane, and soon, more examinees swarm him, all asking to be his teammate. One of the examinees watching asks his friend how Lord Kane is getting so much attention when he's still so young. So his buddy informs him that he's the young master of the Sage Aranka family, meaning that anyone who teams up with him is guaranteed to pass. Louis starts to get intrigued, but suddenly the principal appears in a dazzling manner and congratulates the students on passing the will test. He then reveals that the next test is the power test and flicks his finger, causing a glowing mark to appear on the bodies of all participants. The vast majority of the examinees express their cluelessness about the mark, but Kane identifies it as an Earth attribute mark. Just then, all the examinees start getting pulled to the ground as their bodies have suddenly gotten much heavier. Aronian activates a large magic circle around the area and announces that the second exam requires the participants to fight on the stage while under the influence of Earth magic. While struggling with the strong gravitational pull, some examinees complain that they can't fight in that condition, but one of them points out that someone is walking around like it's nothing, and Kane notices some heavy footprints on the floor. Meanwhile, Louis, the gravity defier they're referring to, easily walks on stage, leaving everyone baffled. Aronian congratulates him for being first again, and Louis smiles while looking at the earth magic strings that failed to hold him down. Kane can't believe his eyes, because even he who received 3 years of master-level training can barely stand. As the other examinees struggle, Aronian declares that only those currently standing can participate in the next test, and uses magic to create a collection of weapons for the qualified examinees to choose from. Louis immediately claims one of the swords and swings it around to test it out. As the other candidates struggle to hold their weapons, Aronian informs them that anyone who steps outside the stage will be disqualified on the spot. When the exam begins, he orders the other exam officials to release something called bound slimes before vanishing. After he leaves, the examinees start questioning themselves to know what bound slimes are, but Louis notices something falling from above. When the slimes land, it's revealed that they get a point from blocking a slime attack, 2 points for dodging, and 5 points for defeating one. Aronian also discloses that their rank will be determined by points earned in that test, and only the top 100 candidates will advance to the third test. Some examinees feel the slimes are easy to beat since they're low-level monsters that look dumb, but when one of them charges at a slime, it suddenly propels itself towards him and destroys his face. It then attacks a second examinee and charges at a group of candidates while the others watch in shock. Soon the entire battlefield becomes a playground for the slimes as they surround and torment the examinees. Although many candidates are easily knocked out, some manage to dodge and block the slime attacks, so they're given points by the exam supervisors. One of the supervisors brings up the fact that this year's exams includes the young masters from the Sage families, the Aranka and Durham houses, referring to Kane and a red-headed warrior girl, and she presumes that a new record will be set. Another examiner adds that there are also excellent commoners among the participants and asks Aronian if the person he helped earlier is a commoner. Aronian presumed that Louis will show them something interesting in the exam, but the supervisor points out that he hasn't moved a single step. As Louis stands on the battlefield, a struggling examinee asks what he's doing, and in response, a pompous nobles start mocking him, saying he's unable to keep up with the slimes because he's a pathetic commoner. Since Louis is still yet to move, the noble speculates that he'll get knocked out soon. Just then, a slime propels itself towards Louis and accelerates until it gets within point-blank range of the back of his skull. Before the slime can make an impact, Louis dodges easily, and another candidate manages to evade the slime as well, before it annihilates the unlucky noble who was making fun of Louis earlier. As his friend lies defeated on the ground, the blonde examinee is frozen in shock because he was certain that Louis wouldn't be able to dodge a high-speed slime attack. Since it failed to hit its main target, the slime goes on a rampage, knocking several other competitors out, and when Louis looks to his left, he notices that it's charging at him again alongside 2 other super-fast slimes. The blonde examinee smiles because he thinks there's no way Louis can dodge that attack, but Louis remains calm and shuts his eyes in preparation for his counterattack. Some time ago, Louis was in the icy mountains training with a group of adventurers, and he asked them to throw a bunch of rocks at him. However, the adventurers were confused and warned him that it would be dangerous for him if the rocks hit him. Louis said it's fine and informed them that there was something he wanted to test. After taking a stance, they told him to make sure he dodged, but when they hurled the rocks at him, He made zero effort to dodge, but rather stared intensely at the approaching rocks. In his previous life, he trained to rapidly transmit information from the parietal line to the cerebellum of the brain. He felt that if he learned how to react instantly, he'd be able to handle any attack. As the rocks drew closer to him, his body started glowing with aura, and he started doing super-fast calculations in his head. Using swift moves, he dodged the rocks, and the adventurers were so amazed by this display that they started singing praises to him. They ran towards him, asking him to tell them all about this new technique. So he revealed his new name for it, which is void combat calculation. When one of the adventurers asked him what it meant, he explained that it was a technique that predicted the outcome of a battle. In the present, as the slimes draw closer to Louis at high speeds, he stares directly at them, several complex formulas swarming his head as he calculates their impending attack. 4 slimes attack him from all angles, but he remains calm because his calculations allowed him to find out that bound slimes can only charge in straight lines despite the high speed and power they possess. He then calculates the speed and angle of their rebounds in order to predict their attack trajectory and performs some stylish moves which allows him to successfully dodge all 4 of them. Now that he has 8 points from dodging the slimes, he switches to offense mode and fires a martial arts move called Sword Slash that destroys all 4 slimes at once. Kane stares in shock, and the supervisors are even more stunned as they realize that his perception is on par with that of a high-grade fighter. Kane smiles when he realizes that Louis is a practitioner of special combat techniques, and he decides that he'll team up with him no matter what. Just then, Louis notices another slime charging towards him to avenge his fallen brothers, so he declares that he has 5 more points in that bag while making his stance. However, Kane uses a swordsmanship move named Sword Pierce to stab the slime, and this ticks off Louis as he accuses him of stealing his kill. Kane playfully admits to doing so, and flaunts the slime stuck on his sword like a kebab while telling him that what he stole wasn't from him. He then slashes his sword in the air, causing the slime to split into 2. And when the remains land in the area where the other examinees are gathered, he tells Louis that he stole it from them. With a handsome smile, he introduces himself to Louis and asks him to join him in stealing points from the others. Louis stares at him apathetically, so he explains that he only wants to rank highly and proposes a competition between them to see who can get more points. When he asks Louis to show him his full power, Louis smiles and applauds him for being confident in his skills before finally agreeing to his request. After grabbing his sword, he stands behind Kane and promises him that he'll show him his full power before stipulating that the loser of their contest has to do whatever the winner says. While making his stance, Kane smiles and accepts the condition before telling him that he's the first person to make demands of him. As slimes begin to surround them, Sheath's minions watch from afar, and they realize that with all the chaos on that battlefield, they can carry out their lord's orders. After a slime zooms past them, they both draw their bows and fire arrows at Kane and Louis. When the slime gets close to them, Louis notices it and slices it in 2, but suddenly, 3 arrows appear millimeters away from him. The impact causes loud sounds that alerts Kane, and the bullies are pleased because they think they've hit their target. However, Louis smirks, and when the smoke clears, they see that the combat genius caught all 3 arrows with one hand. While staring at him, they're overcome with the feelings of shock and fear as they wonder how he was able to react to their surprise attack like it's nothing. As Louis shoves the arrows into the ground, Kane checks on him and calls Sheath's pals scumbags for playing dirty tricks, but Louis says it's nothing. Hearing this, the evil nobles get annoyed and draw their bow while declaring that Kane is the next target. One of them activates a special arrow magic attack called Double Arrow, and fires this enchanted dark arrow at Kane alongside the arrows of his partners. Kane deflects the normal arrows easily using his fencing skills, but the dark arrow keeps driving towards him, leaving him in a dire situation. Blood splashes into the air as the arrow makes contact. Surprisingly, Kane doesn't see the purple arrow hidden amongst the ones he deflected. Luckily for him, Louis catches the arrow in due time, but he injures himself in the process. Kane, whose life he just saved, sees the blood gushing from his hand and tries to help him. However, the bleeding doesn't bother him as he snaps the arrow, fully ready for the enemy's next strike. Meanwhile, one of the spectators calls the attention of the principal to the malicious attack he just witnessed and suggests disqualifying the assailant. However, the principal insists they continue with the event because he's sure the weaklings will lose anyway. He postpones their punishment until after the exam, but asks for healing potions to be prepared immediately. Back in the arena, Louis gets ready to finish off his enemies and assumes a baseball pitcher pose. With glowing eyes and massive cannon power, he propels one of the slimes towards the nobles, and it hits one of them at top speed. The slime's impact sends the noble flying out of the arena and disqualifies him immediately. The remaining nobles witness this and start to panic. Just then, Louis, who doesn't intend to let them go scot-free, jumps into the sky and hits another slime at the freaked-out nobles. The slime hits one of them in the face, taking out his teeth in the process. The last one standing gets immersed in fear that he doesn't notice Louis behind him. However, Louis spooks him, and he staggers backwards. Taking advantage of his loose center of gravity, Kane trips the fool, and he falls out of the arena. After defeating the nobles, Kane thanks Louis for the earlier save and asks about his hand. Thankfully, he is fine, and they both shake on it, solidifying their newfound friendship. Louis teases Kane for being a skillful noble, but Kane defends his background and brags about being from the Aranka family. Apparently, the Aranka family is one of the great families that have produced grandmasters and sages. Their influence is so powerful that they rival the royal family and the Arcanist Association. Realizing that Kane's family is no joke, Louis retracts his earlier comment, and they both prepare to face the rest of the slimes. However, the sight of Louis getting more points continues to piss some of the lower-class nobles off, and they decide to leave the slimes and attack him instead. They rush toward him, all while knowing Kane is by his side. Their plan to kill two birds with one stone backfires as higher-class nobles decide to protect Kane. They clash with the lower-class nobles in a free-for-all battle, while Kane and Louis have each other's backs. Amidst the battle stands a red-haired girl, who from her looks seems to be from a reputable family. She calls her friend, Miliana, who is a commoner, and tells her it's the right time to make the people who looked down on her suffer. The red-haired girl leaps forward to join in, and Miliana follows. The battle gets intense as Louis flips around, dodging slimes and attacks from various ends. Miliana also gets in on the action and trips one of the nobles, while the red-haired girl sends another one flying into the walls. Just then, a new player emerges in the mix, and he turns out to be a red-haired guy wielding a massive hammer. The guy, feeling like the god of thunder, swings his hammer mercilessly and clears all the obstacles in his way. According to him, punching people is way better than beating up slimes. He lets out a massive scream as he blows away his opponents with ease. Meanwhile, the spectators have started to get uneasy, and they suggest stopping the exams. This is due to the fact that the majority of the disqualified members are nobles, and if any more nobles get disqualified, it might cause issues for the academy. However, the principal doesn't mind this, as he believes that the academy has its own rules. Just then, he zooms into the arena in a bright, radiant light and puts a stop to the pandemonium. He announces that the second exam is over and the scores will be announced later. During the short break, the injured participants are treated with a healing potion, and the earth magic effect is eradicated. Louis also uses the healing potion, but he's surprised at how effective it is. Sadly, it is a very expensive item that isn't affordable for commoners like him. After a while, the principal displays the second exam rankings, and everyone is surprised at the result. It turns out that Louis's name isn't on the list, and this news excites some of the low-ranked nobles. However, the list displayed includes participants who ranked from 6th place below. According to the principal, the top 5 rankers all exceeded the record scores, and he soon proceeded to mention their names. In 5th place is Miliana Royce, a skillful commoner. Kane takes home 4th place, while the red-haired girl, Faye Durahan, ranks 3rd. With Kane's name called, Louis starts to get nervous because the principal hasn't mentioned him. He then starts to wonder if he has been disqualified for attacking the low-ranked nobles earlier. However, that isn't the case as his name gets called as the second ranker with 887 points. The whole room echoes in surprise that an ordinary commoner has outshone all the noble participants. Kane, on the other hand, congratulates Louis on a job well done, and based on their earlier pact, he has to do something for Louis. He asks what it is that Louis wants, but Louis says he'll ask for it later. Just then, the winner of the second exam is revealed to be Neil Gunn, who scored a whopping 888 points. Neil Gunn is the red-haired kid who went on a rampage earlier with his massive hammer. He is also a commoner who has managed to rank higher than all the noble candidates, including Faye, who isn't ready to succumb to defeat. She promises to have a match with Neil someday to test his strength. After the announcement, the lower-ranked nobles are scolded by their seniors for allowing commoners to defeat them in the exam. Even one of the spectators is surprised that the first and second rankers are commoners, which is unprecedented in the history of the academy. However, the principal, who seems happy with it, tells him that true strength has nothing to do with social status, and this is the reason most orphanages in the country are run by the Arcanist Association. The principal proceeds to direct the participants to the next venue for the final exam. As they walk toward the place, Kane praises Louis for being so close to the first ranker and wonders who the stronger person is between Louis and Neil. Soon, they arrive at the final exam venue, and the principal informs them that the exam will be a survival test known as Emblem Battle Royale. For this exam, emblems will be given to each of the participants, and they'll be teleported to different areas in the forest. Their goal is to collect as many emblems as possible, using whatever method they feel comfortable with. Participants who lose their emblems will be immediately disqualified, and only the top 10 participants with the most emblems will be admitted into the academy. Sadly, the rules of the third exam mean that Kane and Louis won't be able to work together, so they wish each other good luck. Soon, the participants are teleported to a different place, and Louis arrives at his location. He walks forward for a while, thinking about the third exam being the final hurdle to cross for admission. With great determination, he promises to win this time. However, he is soon interrupted by a noble wielding a massive axe. The guy presses Louis for humiliating the nobles in the last exam, and just then, two nobles wielding spears appear behind Louis as well. Louis also notices another one on a tree branch, wielding a crossbow. Realizing he's been cornered, he quickly deduces that the senior who teleported him leaked his location. Suddenly, the guy with the axe swings it at him, but he manages to dodge it in time and the axe smashes into a rock on the ground. The guys with the spears also launch their attack, but Louis counters them with a backflip. However, while in the air, an arrow from the one wielding a crossbow flies toward him, but he smacks it away with his sword. He successfully lands on the ground, but the nobles do not relent. They attack him head-on, but Louis demonstrates the difference in their skill. He dodges their strikes smoothly, but an arrow flies in yet again. He deflects it with his sword, but a spear attack looms behind it. Luckily, he reacts in time and dodges it again. His fast reactions start to frustrate the nobles, but they do not give up. Louis, on the other hand, is also frustrated because he can't read the wind arrow's trajectories. However, he calms himself down and proceeds to use a martial art technique known as sen-no-sen counterattack. The technique involves using one's enemy's power against them. As the nobles dash forward with their weapons again, Louis sees an opening and goes for it. His first victim is the axe guy, who tries to strike with his full strength. He swerves to the right, dodges the axe, and places his sword just below it. With that, he swings the axe away from the wielder, and it hits one of the spear holders. After taking them out, the other spear wielder attacks Louis, and the guy in the tree also shoots his wind arrow at him. However, Louis reads the arrow trajectory conveniently and drags the spear wielder in the arrow's path. The poor get sent flying, leaving his spear behind. While the spear is in the air, Louis grabs it and throws it at the guy in the tree, taking him out immediately. He then cuts through the rest of the nobles like butter and takes all their emblems. In a massive twist, Kane appears on top of a tree and stops the nobles from using magic against Louis. The mastermind, who originally planned to subdue Kane with another low-ranked noble party, gets shocked at his sudden appearance in their location. Kane claims he must have underestimated the Aranka family by sending such weaklings to stall him. He then knocks him out cold with a crossbow. Afterward, Kane jumps down and passes an emblem to Louis. He claims things might become more troublesome if it continues like this, and offers to help. However, Louis refuses his help and tells him he will handle his problems himself. Just then, a hidden figure claps loudly and commends Louis' zeal. The figure claims they expect nothing less from the person they acknowledge and consider a rival. The hidden figure reveals herself and turns out to be Faye Durahan. She asks Louis for a duel, and he asks Kane if she's his friend. Kane replies that she's not his friend, but a grandmaster's daughter whom he dueled in the past. Back then, he lost to her because he let his guard down and advised Louis to ignore her and collect emblems instead. He warns Louis that Faye can use magic, and her skill level is already at an apprentice level. Meanwhile, their chit-chat starts getting on Faye's nerves, and she scolds them both for trying to run away. Just then, Louis accepts the challenge and claims he has always wanted to know how a member of a great family will fare in battle. This notion excites Faye, and she promises not to use magic to make the fight fair. In a flash, she leaps toward Louis with her spear and stabs him. However, Louis manages to trap the spear under his arms, further impressing Faye. She flips the spear around and swings it at Louis, but he dodges the strike by moving to the side. Just then, Faye leaps forward and tries to hit Louis using the Sacred Lance Slam technique. As expected, he dodges it, and the spear hits the ground, creating a massive hole in the ground. The impact of the spear technique shocks the spectators and the principal watching not far from the scene. They start to speculate on Faye's power and Louis's resilience. They start to wonder how long Louis will last against a great family and ask the principal for his opinion. The principal replies that Louis will not be able to defeat Faye because their battle is a clash of body and will. Based on what he has seen, he doesn't believe Louis has a stronger will than Faye. Just then, their wills get put to the test as Faye uses another spear technique to attack Louis. However, he dodges all her moves effortlessly as if programmed to do so. In the process of weaving the spear, he sees an opening in Faye's body and tries to exploit it. Unfortunately, Faye quickly catches on and counters him instead, but he leaps over her attack and lands behind her. Faye expresses her frustration at him dodging all her attacks and even takes a dig at Kane for lacking such a quality. However, Louis claims the key is observation, and with enough practice it becomes quite easy. Soon, Faye leaps forward yet again with another sacred lance technique known as the Crescent Fall and attacks Louis with it. But once again, he dodges each of the attacks effortlessly. This time he thinks about the various techniques used by spear users, which include thrusts, sweeps, defense, and suppression. Although these techniques are quite troublesome, there are also weaknesses associated with them. One of them includes vulnerability in close combat, and Lewis intends to exploit this. He rushes toward Faye and tries to close the distance between them so as to create room for his counterattack. Unfortunately, she reads his intention and smacks his sword. She then tells him that her family's spear technique has no weakness. Suddenly, she starts spinning around with the spear and creates a dangerous tornado. Faye's talent and skill surprise the spectators, and in their eyes, Louis stands no chance against her. However, Louis takes a stance and activates his sword net technique with hope of deflecting Faye's spear attacks. While parrying the strikes, he proceeds to exploit another weakness of spear techniques, which is high stamina consumption. He defends diligently and waits for an opening, but unknown to him, his sword has started to crack. Just then, Faye's stamina wears out, and she becomes visible within the spear tornado. Louis sees this and strikes her immediately. Unfortunately, his sword breaks just before it reaches her. Seeing that his move failed, he quickly leaps backward to avoid a counterattack. Surprisingly, Faye acknowledges Louis's skill and her luck because without it, she would have been obliterated by him. Also, she knows that Louis is holding back and confronts him about it, but he makes an excuse of always observing before going all out. However, he claims he's done observing, and he'll now get serious. But Faye is concerned about his broken weapon. Louis assures her that he's better off without one, because his fists are his true weapon. Like IP Man, Louis takes his martial arts stance while Faye readies her weapon, ready to strike. She zooms forward with a spinning charge technique, and Kane, who has been quiet for a while, screams at Louis to warn him about it. Surprisingly, Louis slows down the spinning spear with his left palm before trapping it with his right. In the end, Louis traps the spinning spear in between his palms, dropping the jaws of both Faye and Kane. Also, the jaws of the speculators are dropped, but the principal manages to keep his cool. He stares at the scene intently, trying to figure out what Louis had just done. Meanwhile, Faye doesn't give up yet and snatches back her spear. She tries another technique in her playbook and creates the illusion of herself attacking Louis from all sides. However, instead of panicking, Louis takes a deep breath and assumes his martial arts stance. With his palm, he parries all the attacks one by one until he diverts every one of them away from himself. This skill hasn't been seen before by either Faye or the principal. He then proceeds to land a proper hit on Faye and sends her flying. Luckily for her, she strikes her spear into the ground, which gradually puts a stop to the momentum. After stopping, she asks Louis about the technique he just used, and he replies in a calm tone that it's a form of parry in martial arts. He then jumps toward her for another round, and Faye quickly reacts with her spear. Strangely, her attacks are easily evaded by Louis, who seems to be right in front of her and not in front of her at the same time. This even makes Kane wonder if it's an optical illusion, while Faye vents out her frustration at not being able to hit him. It turns out that Louis has been using the butterfly step, which is an elegant step created by a legendary boxer in his past life. It involves rapid movement of one's feet back and forth, which creates a hard-to-catch rhythm, perfect countering Faye's spear technique. Soon he catches Faye in a tight spot and blows her away. The spectator and the principal witness this and immediately start wondering if Louis is perhaps a genius in hand-to-hand combat. Even though Faye is on the ground holding her stomach, she refuses to give up. She abandons her spear and leaps toward Louis with full force, holding up her fists. Louis, however, doesn't let his guard down and immediately assumes the Wing Chun stance. As Faye approaches him with a crushing fist technique, he immediately blocks it, but the impact seems very similar to a technique he knows called inch power. Louis smiles and commends her resilience, but Faye isn't flattered. She claims the Durahan family isn't all about the spear, before crashing into Louis with another crushing fist technique. Louis takes his stance, ready for the impact, and they both start exchanging fists like kung fu experts. Strangely, Louis' excitement starts to get out of hand, because fighting a strong opponent to his heart's content is all he has ever envisioned. As the fight grows intense, he starts demanding for more, and soon his eyes turn bloodshot red, and so does his heart. He leaps toward Faye with an extreme killing intent aura oozing from his body. Faye looks up at his towering figure and gets terrified of the sight. What she sees is a demon with huge fangs, opening its mouth wide open, ready to swallow her up. Suddenly, she isn't able to move her body fast enough to evade Louis' strike. However, she still manages to block his punch, but the impact sends her flying into a tree. The principal also notices the strange aura emitting from Louis and wonders what it is. The remaining nobles who witness Faye crashing into a tree get infuriated by the fact that a commoner defeated a noble from a great family. They try to retaliate, but they're suddenly hit by a strange feeling, and it forces one of them to throw up. The guy wonders why he suddenly felt sick, but after seeing Louis and his demonic aura, it all started to add up. A jealous noble senior, Sheath, watches the duel from afar with his injured friend Brian, and they're forced to admit that Louis is far stronger than expected. This realization fills Sheath with anger, as his plan to knock out the commoner has completely failed. Brian then concludes that Lewis must be eliminated at all costs. Remembering the old legend, he believes that letting someone like Louis live could become an issue later and hopes to end Louis' life as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Louis' rampage continues as he lunges straight at Faye. Laughing hysterically, the maniac pummels her and sends her flying, making her spit up blood again. Following that, he flash steps to her midair and sends her crashing into the ground with a series of heavy fist attacks. Faye barely holds up her defensive stance and tanks the incessant attacks while thinking about the explosive increase in Louis's strength and strength. Understanding the gap between them, she concludes that she has no chance of winning. Just then, she's faced with Louis' terrifying fist aura, and her life flashes before her eyes. Refusing to accept the impending doom, Faye quickly activates her martial arcane technique, Blaze Fist, in a desperate attempt to counter Louis's strike. However, Louis' attack overwhelms her and sends her flying once again, crashing through trees as she tumbles through the air. Suddenly, Louis returns to his senses and realizes that he lost himself again. He stares at his burnt hand and reflects on the nature of magic, but Kane hurriedly comes to check if he's all right. From nowhere, Sheath steps forward and loudly announces Louis's disqualification, claiming his emblem was destroyed during the fight. He orders Louis to leave immediately, but Kane tries to argue, insisting that it was clearly an accident. Sheath then reveals that the principal witnessed everything and demands that Louis exit the exam grounds at once. Before Louis can respond, Faye speaks up and tells the noble scumbag to stop, but the fact that she is still conscious shocks Louis. Sheath accuses her of trying to help the commoner cheat, but Faye shuts him down without hesitation. She then apologizes to Louis for accidentally using magic during the fight, and it stuns Kane, who never imagined she could ever apologize to anyone. However, Louis also apologizes for going berserk earlier, but she brushes it off, claiming that it's fine. Since he forced her to use magic, Faye admits defeat and hopes they get to have another match after their enrollment. Just then, Sheath scoffs at her words, pointing out that Louis only has 4 emblems. Unfazed, Faye pulls out her stash of emblems and hands them over to Louis as a reward for defeating her. This adds 10 more to his collection, and Faye validates the record from the furious noble senior. She teams up with Kane to weed out the weaklings in the exam grounds and make sure no one has enough emblems to disqualify Louis. Kane, who's also on the same page with her, accepts her suggestion, and they swiftly head off to begin their conquest. As they leave, Kane teases her because he always thought she was all brawn and no brains, but she's more concerned with getting more emblems. Shortly after, an examiner approaches Louis and informs him of his disqualification, escorting him out. Sheath hopes he never sees the commoner again, but Brian remarks that Louis might still pass if Faye's plan succeeds. Suddenly, Sheath remembers that it's not strange for an examinee to die by accident during the exam. Brian watches him make eerie plans to end Louis's life and wonders what Louis's true identity is because of the unsettling sensation he felt earlier. Later that day, Louis submits the emblems to the examiner and reflects on how martial arts alone can't match magic. He hopes to learn at the academy so he can fuse magic and martial arts. That night, Louis thinks about how to explain his roughed-up clothes to his mother on his way home, and he walks past a shady person. As he contemplates, the assassin attempts to stealthily take him out from behind. Reacting instantly, Louis counters with a powerful backheel kick that sends the assassin flying backwards. The assassin questions how Louis noticed him, and he calmly replies that the scent of blood on him is impossible to hide. Suddenly, more assassins appear, and their leader wonders why Louis is awfully laid back for someone who's about to lose his life. The 3 assassins surround Louis, and he decides to go all out after noticing their strength. But the stronger presence hidden in the bushes draws his attention. Annoyed, the assassin leader scolds Louis for getting distracted during their battle and charges at him with a dagger coated with magic, declaring that he will soon be 6 feet under in no time if he keeps it up. Faced with the assassin leader charging straight at him at full throttle, Louis dodges the rapid stab attacks coming his way. Thereafter, he grabs the assassin's hand and counters by slamming him into the ground. However, the opponent swiftly recovers, pulls back, and retreats to join his companions. He then acknowledges the accurate intel he got on Louis' top-tier abilities, but Louis wonders what he's blabbing about. After praising Louis' hand-to-hand combat skill, he wonders aloud how well Louis would fare against magic. Without waiting for an answer, he signals to his company to commence the magic assault. At that moment, 3 assassins fire wind arrows from their crossbows at Louis. Fortunately, he reacts quickly and dodges them, then turns his attention to the nearby trees that were struck. By observing the damage, he gauges the destructive power of the wind arrows. Knowing he has no choice but to push forward, Louis takes a deep breath to activate a breathing technique that uses the chi within his body to amplify his physical strength and grant him explosive speed. He then charges at them, but their leader dismisses his efforts and orders another wave of wind arrows. However, Louis skillfully dodges the shots, and the assassins soon lose track of him. To their surprise, Louis descends from above and delivers a powerful kick that sends the leader crashing to the ground and immediately retreats while evading more wind arrows. Enraged, the leader orders his men to stop Louis, and out of nowhere, another assassin suddenly appears behind Louis and launches a surprise chop kick. Louis luckily perceives the stealth attack in time and blocks it, though the impact sends a sharp jolt through his arms. He quickly regroups and glares at the new enemy, whom he considers a more serious threat. Before Louis can react further, he realizes he has been surrounded and struggles to evade the wind arrows flying in from all directions. Unable to escape the relentless attacks, Louis gets hit and loses consciousness. The assassins breathe a sigh of relief and comment on how impressive it was for a commoner to last that long. One of them moves in to finish him off, but Louis suddenly jolts awake and immediately takes him out. He then grabs the guy's crossbow and fires wind arrows at the other assassins. 2 assassins are taken down, but the strong one easily parries the shot. Realizing that Louis was pretending to be unconscious, he applauds his impressive feat. Louis then asks why he's not moved after losing his underlings, but the shady dude doesn't care about weaklings. Just then, Louis shoots more wind arrows at him, but his evasive skills are on a different level entirely. He lunges at Louis and forms a magic hammer out of thin air. As he attacks, he admits that he wanted to take Louis in as a disciple, but his employer's orders leave him no choice. Louis tries to tank the heavy attack with his body, but it sends him flying instead. Still in midair, the opponent flash steps to his side and reveals that Louis' ability might exceed that of an apprentice, but it's not enough to take on a higher-ranked fighter. Thereafter, he summons the magic hammer again and immediately slams Louis into the ground. Without allowing him time to recover, the assassin continues his assault, unleashing waves of magic attacks. When the dust finally settles, the assassin is surprised to see that Louis is still alive, but the persistent lad holds on in a defensive stance despite his injuries. Clearly in pain, Louis declares that he won't end there, but the assassin thinks otherwise. In addition, he claims that no one can save Louis from the impending doom as he materializes another magic hammer. Unable to move, Louis panics as he stares at the enemy trying to send him over the Rainbow Bridge. The assassin attacks with his martial arcane skill called Celestial Hammer, and in that moment, Louis's life flashes before his eyes. He remembers his aim to learn magic and protect his family at the orphanage. Without caring about the repercussions, he decides to change his fate, and the aura surrounding him immediately changes. He counters with his mysterious power, and it keeps the assassin's attack at bay. Surprisingly, the collision and power struggle trigger a massive explosion. Moments later, Louis coughs while lying on the ground, and the assassin wonders aloud why it strangely feels like he's fighting an equal. Realizing the reason Louis is being targeted, he raises his magic hammer once more, determined to end what he now sees as a monster. Out of nowhere, a commanding voice orders the assassin to stop, and a violent wind vortex quickly interrupts him before he can turn Louis into fish food. As he retreats, more wind vortices instantly trap him in place and crush him with overwhelming pressure. Unable to escape, the assassin screams in pain as the magic restrains his body completely. Confused by the sudden turn of events, Louis wonders what's going on, and out of nowhere, Principal Aronian arrives and commends him for suppressing his rampage. He hands Louis a magic potion to drink and turns his sharp gaze toward the exhausted assassin. He then interrogates the intruder, demanding his employer's name. The assassin realizes that he's a grandmaster and claims that he won't be able to protect Louis from his impending doom. He laughs hysterically and claims that it's just the beginning before blowing himself up. Seeing the disturbing incident, Principal Aronian wonders if the Assassin's Guild is involved and then hopes that he's overthinking things. Meanwhile, Louis notices the effects of the potion and is amazed by its healing power since it also completely repairs his fractured bones. He then asks Principal Aronian if it's merely a coincidence that he was there and wonders aloud why he is always there just in time to save him. The principal decides to save the discussion for when they reach his home, and Louis immediately begins to panic because it's already late and his mom would be worried. Without wasting a second, he rushes off toward home while Principal Aronian summons a mysterious creature named Kylie, tasking it with cleaning up duties. Elsewhere, in the town of Mantia, located in the northern part of the Kandria Empire, 2 noblemen confront Lasiela. Using the repaired millstone as an excuse, they harass her while she waits for the children to return. Lasiela calmly explains that she is only waiting, but the noblemen ignore her words and continue pressing forward with ill intent to assault her. Thankfully, Louis arrives just in time to stop the crackheads. Lasiela celebrates his return but is shocked by his roughed-up state. Louis asks if she's okay, but she's more concerned about his torn clothes and the blood on them. As he tries to make up excuses to relieve her worries, the noblemen threaten him with their lord and the fighter George. To their surprise, Principal Aronian arrives midair, and as he descends, he tackles the misunderstanding. He then introduces himself and pressures the scumbags to leave. Seeing that he's a real grandmaster, the noblemen bow and buzz off. Principal Aronian then turns to La Ciela and reveals that they need to have a discussion. Soon after, La Ciela leads him into their house, but he notices the millstone that the scumbags were complaining about earlier. He wonders how it works automatically without magic, and after a closer look, realizes that things like that are all over the place. La Ciela offers him some fruits and gives all the credit to Louis, whose creations have made their lives easier. She then asks if he committed any crime to warrant the principal's visit, but Principal Aronian reveals that it's the other way round. In addition, he emphasizes how talented Louis is, which is something he has only seen in the Gaia scriptures. In the past, during the tyrannical rule of the monsters, a genius who was guided by the goddess emerged among the humans. He created the martial arcane after comprehending the essence of elements, and after 5 years, he defeated the monsters together with his companions and saved humanity from doom. Thereafter, that day became the day recognized and celebrated as Liberation Day, and the dude is called the first hero in the Gaia scriptures. While La Ciela praises the alleged savior, Louis claims it wasn't recorded in folk legends, but Principal Aronian insists that there's one. However, he reveals that the first hero had black hair and eyes, which is a secret known to humanity's top officials. Apparently, the madness in his heart overwhelmed him, and he committed a grave sin that warranted erasing him from history. This revelation surprises Louis, who wonders if he also has this inner madness. Principal Aronian adds that every country eliminates people with black hair and eyes to avoid any mishaps. He then confronts Louis for dyeing his hair, and La Ciela immediately takes the blame, revealing her innocent reason for making him do it. She begins to list out Louis's good perks, but he stops her, claiming that the principal has other intentions because the Grandmaster could have killed him if he wanted. Impressed, Principal Aronian praises his foresight, which is remarkable for his age, and infers that the young lad has tamed his inner madness. To their surprise, the principal considers Louis the new hero even in the peaceful era. As he grabs a fruit with telekinesis, he talks about the darkness constantly lurking beneath, and decides to guide Louis on the right path after witnessing his ability. He suddenly throws the fruit at Louis, and the unfazed lad catches it effortlessly. Following that, Principal Aronian says he passed the test thanks to Faye and Kane's efforts to fail most of the other examinees. Thereafter, he asks Louis to be his disciple at the academy, but he excitedly asks what the principal will do if he later goes berserk. Instantly, the fruit in Louis's hand is cut into pieces, and it shocks him. Cold as ice, Principal Aronian replies that he'll personally send him to the Creator when that happens. While working in the yard the following morning, one of Louis's foster siblings praises him for receiving a personal invitation from Principal Aronian, but Louis also considers it a warning. The sibling blabbers on about the Academy's fees while Louis thinks about the connection he has with the legendary hero. He recalls the principal's words back then and wonders if he can really trust them. Before Principal Aronian left the previous night, Louis privately asked him why he revealed everything to La Ciela, making her anxious. He claimed ignorance would make her a burden, but Louis didn't think so. Principal Aronian then said she needed to know because his family would be in danger if his identity were exposed. Before he flew off, he told Louis to become stronger because it was just the beginning of his trials. After reminiscing, Louis confirms that Principal Aronian is right and decides to get stronger at the academy. Moments later, his younger siblings come over to greet him farewell, and his sister named Lana jumps into his arms. With teary eyes, she asks if he'll visit regularly and makes him do the pinky promise that he'll visit during long breaks. Thereafter, an older sibling informs Louis about the noble's butler calling for him. Soon after, Louis goes out to meet the butler, who immediately confirms his identity and then hands him an invitation while introducing himself as a butler of the Aranka family. Upon seeing Kane's invitation, Louis guesses his intention to strengthen their friendship and decides to play along. The butler leads him into the carriage, and they begin the trip. Later that day, they arrive at the town of Harzan, and as Louis alights from the carriage, the butler briefs him about the Aranka family. Louis's jaw drops upon seeing the great family's huge mansion, but Kane rushes out to welcome him. Kane reiterates that they're now classmates, and Louis says it's thanks to his efforts in the final exam. He also acknowledges Faye's help and decides to let their earlier bet slide. However, Kane says he'd have passed either way since he has Faye's seal of approval. He then reveals his intention to have Louis as his sparring partner while also giving him information about the academy and magic beforehand. Just then, Kane's mother arrives and confronts him for bringing a filthy commoner into their house. Kane claims that Louis is his friend, but she disregards his words and asks Louis what his intentions are for approaching her son. Disgusted with breathing the same air as the commoner, she takes out a gold ring worth dozens of gold coins and throws it at him. She then orders him to buzz off, but Kane isn't having it. As he turns to apologize to Louis, he sees him picking up the ring. Louis reveals how he acknowledged her son's ability and became friends with him. He then asks if she considers Kane's words to be worth as little as the gold ring, and it immediately infuriates her. While glaring daggers at him, she orders someone to throw him out, and the butlers quickly gather around to do her bidding. However, Kane tries to convince his mother that Louis beat Faye, but she doesn't believe the ridiculous statement. Louis affirms it and declares that Kane can get stronger if he's around. His arrogance pisses Kane's mother off, but at that moment the mansion's door opens and a strong wind pushes the butlers out of the way. Kane's father, William, enters and reiterates Louis's confident declaration. Kane's mother flinches and quickly tries to appeal to him, but he walks right past her. Kane bows to greet his father, and Louis also greets him before introducing himself, while thinking about his incredible aura, which is on par with Principal Aronian. William asks Kane if it's true, and he reveals that Louis is stronger than him. Intrigued, William asks Louis to prove it and immediately releases his killing intent, which takes the form of a ferocious tiger. Before Louis can react, the ferocious aura swiftly sinks its fangs into his chest, and he soon realizes that he can't breathe. Just then, Louis panics as he concludes that William seriously intends to end his life. At that moment, William literally stares daggers into him, and his willpower tears a hole in Louis's soul. While trying to gather his thoughts, Louis realizes how terrifying the willpower of the Grandmaster is. However, he has built a resistance to killing intent thanks to continuous monster hunting in the past few years. Looking fired up, the hole in his soul begins to recover with his burning resolve and willpower. The fire in his soul bursts out, and to William's surprise, it takes the form of a dragon. The standoff of willpowers begins, and the two clash for a little while. After the dust settles, Kane quickly checks on Louis and helps him to his feet after losing the battle of wills. Thereafter, William asks Louis why he seeks strength, and he claims it's to protect his family. Without showing any facial emotion, William turns to leave but scolds Kane for his weak willpower and asks him to learn some things from Louis. Unhappy with the development, Kane's mother tries to talk to William about his decision, but he coldly turns down her opinion. Relieved, Kane then decides to take Louis to the training ground right away. At Aranka's family's martial arts training ground, Kane apologizes on his parents' behalf, but Louis says it's fine. He then talks about how extreme William was and tries to relieve Kane's worries by acknowledging his ability. However, Kane claims that Louis is far more suited to be the Aranka family's son, but Louis sees the whole incident as William testing him for Kane's sake. He wonders aloud if it's William's way of showing love, and his words take Kane down memory lane. Looking back at his life, Kane didn't get to leave the mansion frequently when he was little, and he only had memories of eating, sleeping, and training. Apparently, William wishes to raise him into a great sage like his grandfather. Kane soon realizes that he always wanted his father's acknowledgement, but along the way, the mansion became a prison while his status and talents chained him down. The lad kept yearning for the outside and freedom like birds flying across the continent. Unfortunately for him, he's too weak for a world where only strength matters. While he picks up a rapier in the inventory, he notes that swinging his blade is the only way to break these chains. Following that, Kane discloses that his father is also a graduate of the academy and decides to get stronger so he can receive permission to live freely. Kane then turns to Louis, counting on him to make him strong, and the two friends commence their spar. Meanwhile, William watches the duo from a distance and asks his butler about the results of his investigations. The butler tells him that Louis isn't ordinary, narrating his exploits during the exam. After hearing how he defeated Faye and gained Principal Aronian's help on multiple occasions, William concludes that Louis is a troublemaker. The butler then asks why he still allowed Louis in, and William explains how people hone their skills with challenges and grow after overcoming these said troubles. From his intuition, he guesses that Louis can really help Kane get stronger. Meanwhile, Louis, who's fighting without any weapon, kicks Kane backward. Kane recovers and activates a martial arcane skill named Wind Lunge. He charges at Louis with a swift stab attack boosted with wind magic. Unfortunately for him, he runs into Louis's fist, almost ruining his pretty face, and loses the bout. Thereafter, Louis acknowledges the skill but points out its demerits. After receiving the pointers, Kane then understands why Faye couldn't defeat Louis, but wonders aloud why Louis is staring at his face. Louis takes the rapier from him and asks if he ever felt something was off with his fighting style. Unable to understand what he means, Kane reveals that he's using the Aranka family's techniques that are passed down in the family, and they made his father and the grandfather strong. Louis tells him about other paths, and Kane wonders if the path is different from that of his predecessors. Just then, Louis returns the rapier to the inventory, shows Kane a dagger, and calls him over to make plans to surprise his father. Out of nowhere, the duo surprisingly lunges at William armed with daggers, but right before that, Louis takes a moment to lecture Kane on the importance of speed in martial arts. Referring back to the slime test during the academy exam, he explains that speed is not just about movement, but also reaction time and the ability to make quick decisions. Coincidentally, Kane's natural speed pairs well with his wind attribute, but the difficulty of using thrusting weapons is high. Louis hands Kane 2 daggers and tells him that what worked for his father and grandfather may not necessarily work for him. He then guesses that it's the reason William stopped growing after reaching the Grandmaster level and asks Kane to change to a specialized combat style to maximize his talents. Louis asks if he's up for it, but the dude is ready to do anything to gain freedom. Louis acknowledges his determination and quickly explains how the new combat style works. Following that, they make plans to jump Williams and unveil Kane's ability and determination. Soon after, they charge at William, and Kane immediately activates his wind magic support spell, Accelerate. The spell boosts their speed, allowing them to close the distance rapidly. The sudden burst of movement worries the butler, but William calmly stops him and easily dodges Kane's attack first. Afterward, Louis flash steps to his side and unleashes a wave of slashes, but William dodges them effortlessly. While at it, Louis considers daggers the fastest weapons and then decides to combine them with combat techniques. Just then, Louis uses his martial art, Butterfly Step, hoping to shock his opponent with his explosive speed. The skill surprises William a little, but he still keeps dodging the wave of attacks. Kane follows suit and uses his aerial skill to boost himself. In the midst of the chaos, he suddenly realizes that his body feels so light, and it gives him a sense of freedom he has never experienced before. Seeing how compatible he is with the weapons, he decides to fuse his combat techniques and wind magic. As soon as Kane fuses them, it draws William's attention, and the sight of it shocks him. Kane accepts his newfound martial way and tries to get a hit in, but before he can, William releases a massive outburst that pushes the pesky lads backward, and he furiously asks Kane if he is abandoning the clan's techniques to prove his will. The duo regroups, and Louis immediately tells Kane to use Accelerate again. Without hesitating, Kane holds Louis's shoulder and immediately activates the spell, and the duo continues the assault at full throttle. William watches their synchronized movements, but his evasive skills are on a whole different level. Shortly after, he gets his aura on one of Kane's blades, but he breaks free from his father's grasp and retreats again. This infuriates William, who immediately calls him a coward, but Kane recalls Louis's lectures earlier about the merits of retreating. He soon regains his footing and confronts his father again. However, Kane dodges again, using a tornado spell, and regroups with Louis. The duo charge at him from behind, screaming at the top of their lungs while hoping their next attack connects. Earlier, Louis had taught Kane about a baseball technique known as a change-up. He demonstrated how altering speed can deceive opponents, making even slow movements appear dangerous. He explained that when used correctly, it disrupts an enemy's timing and delays their reaction. If an opponent hesitates for even a moment, that delay can be exploited. Now the duo puts the technique into practice, attempting to overwhelm William through unpredictable speed variations. William casually dodges their attacks, dismissing the slow attacks as nothing against him, but soon after, Kane's delayed attack surprises him. The blade grazes William's shoulder, damaging his fur. The successful hit excites the boys, and they continue the incessant attacks, but to their surprise, William claims it's enough. He orders Kane not to disgrace their family's name and then leaves the training ground. Kane, thrilled by what he believes to be his father's approval, accepts the command and celebrates with Louis as William departs alongside the butler. As he walks away, William reflects on the techniques the duo used against him. The hit and retreat tactics linger in his thoughts, and the idea of strategic withdrawal begins to interest him. He materializes a dagger, realizing that he may have learned something new from the children. Meanwhile, Louis begins to miss the opportunity of battling a grandmaster, but Kane is enjoying the best feeling in his entire life because his father acknowledged him for the first time, and he decides to reward Louis with a present for making it a reality. Later, at Aranka's family library, the sheer number of books stuns Louis. But Kane comes to him with a box containing the rewards and thanks him for helping find his path quickly. The box's content stuns Louis because they're very valuable. Inside are extremely valuable books, including the Academy's references and rare magic texts that commoners rarely see. Hoping that the books would help him, Kane gives him the books that teach basic mana theory and mana attribute theory, but then goes on to give him some tips about the divisions into magic and martial arts. In addition, Kane lectures Louis about the Magic Awakening ritual, which happens to be a ritual that all new students must undergo. Presumably, it's a ritual where one senses the elements through the statue of Gaia, and it costs 10 gold coins to undergo at the church temple, but fortunately for Louis, it's free at the Academy. Kane also lists various Academy fees and future expenses, urging Louis to accept the gifts and rely on him whenever he needs help. Soon after, Louis accepts the gifts and considers their earlier bet settled at Kane's request. Louis realizes that he needs to start earning money and recalls Julian's mention of magic pharmacy. Suddenly, he also remembers that he can use knowledge from his previous life to invent useful items and make money faster. With that thought in mind, Louis asks Kane about his family's connection to the Merchant Guild, and Kane curiously wants to know his reason for asking. But Louis keeps it a secret from him, claiming that he'll find out soon enough. 1 week later, the freshmen are welcomed into the Candria Arcanist Academy. As Louis boldly walks onto the school grounds, Rose, a sophomore, gets a whiff of his cologne and concludes he must be related to a noble. After all, he has the trendy, expensive cologne. She instantly latches onto him and offers to give him a tour of the school. As Rose leads him inside, she informs him that because the emperor has gotten old, the imperial heirs have been fighting with the nobles and great families at the academy. It's all thanks to the principal that things look calm on the surface. But behind the scenes, there's a fierce struggle for educational resources. Because of this, any student who gets targeted and fails to earn points can get expelled. With that, Rose touches his cheek and asks him who his family supports. But a guy named Brian shows up and refers to Louis as a commoner who broke the exam record. This shocks Rose because the cologne on Louis isn't something anyone can afford, so she gets mad and walks off. Louis then shakes Brian's hand, and Brian informs him that the academy is a miniature empire, and Louis will face many people like Rose. Suddenly, Kane calls out to Louis, and as soon as Brian sees him, he walks away. Surprised, Kane asks Louis what he talked about with Brian, and Louis mentions how they only greeted each other. There, he learns that Brian is the Chancellor's son. From behind them, two familiar faces show up, and Day, being one of them, calls Brian weak-willed and says she doesn't like him. Kane gets pissed at her and yells at her for indirectly calling him weak. She tells Kane that the only way she can acknowledge him is if he is as strong as Louis. Upon seeing her, Louis thanks her for her help in the exam, but she brushes him off and tells him that he passed on his own strength. She raises her fist at him, swearing that she'll win the next time they fight, and this makes Kane upset, so he yells at her for ignoring him and talking to only Louis. After a little back and forth, Miliana pulls Faye away, telling her that they need to continue their registration. Right after they leave, Kane hands Louis a huge purse filled with gold coins, saying it's Louis's share. This shocks Louis that they could make so much from the instructions he gave Kane. Back then, Kane had visited Louis, who brought samples of the perfume he had crafted to the Burna Village Trading Company. At first, Kane wasn't so sure that such a nice fragrance would sell so well, but presently, after witnessing the cologne's success, he wonders if he should have his mom try it out. With that, they decide to keep the secret between themselves, and they walk up to the student reception to complete their registration. In no time, Louis is handed a credit card, and the nobles in line are upset with him being their classmates, so they murmur that he definitely used Kane and Faye's success to get in. After listening to them, Louis learns that Sheath got expelled, so he asks Kane about it, and Kane informs him that Sheath was the mastermind behind the assassins the other day, and when the school found out, the principal expelled him. Louis immediately frowns upon learning it was Sheath who nearly got him killed. But as if that isn't enough, Kane points to a group of students and tells Louis that Sheath has an elder brother named Jess, and they don't know what he'll do, so it's best Louis sticks close to Kane. Jess and his lackeys see Louis, but Jess smiles, saying it's just the beginning. He vows to ensure Louis savor despair slowly. Later that day, in the Academy's Grand Hall, the principal welcomes the freshmen and addresses them. After giving them a pep talk, he welcomes Neil to the stage as the freshman representative to give a speech. To everyone's surprise, the brute walks up unclad to the stage with his enormous axe, and he releases his killing intent. The teachers immediately try to lunge at him, but Aronian stops them. Neil then yells at the students, calling them morons, and he informs them that his goal is to whoop every last one of them. They immediately get mad at him and yell back for thinking he's some hotshot, but Neil doubles down with his insult. Just by watching Neil's drama, his new homeroom teacher who knows what's in store for him starts complaining, but Aronian pacifies him. Suddenly, Neil throws his axe into the crowd, yelling that one of the students is his main target. The thing crashes right in front of Louis, and in that instant, Neil closes the gap and perches on the axe's handle. He calls out Louis's name while looking at him like he's dinner. Then he declares they are going to fight. Kane immediately interrupts by reminding Neil that the entrance ceremony is still going. He tries to block Neil's path, yelling at the brute to get away from Louis, but then Neil continues speaking to Louis, asking if he isn't like the loudmouth beside him who is all bark and no bite. Pissed, Kane gets mad at Neil and then swings a fist at him, but Louis stops him and tells him to calm down. Neil, on the other hand, is excited and he tells them he didn't mind fighting them both. To calm the situation, Brian shows up and advises Neil to get along with Louis. After all, they both are talented commoners, and if Neil continues acting this way, he won't last long at the academy. In one glance, Neil tells Brian to get lost and calls him a small fry he isn't interested in. Brian is instantly offended, and the other nobles conclude that commoners shouldn't be allowed in the academy because they have no manners. Kane snickers at Brian for embarrassing himself by showing up. He then cracks his knuckles and prepares to fight Neil, who seems eager for their battle. Unfortunately for them, a teacher shows up and stops Neil. He tells them that student-on-student fights are prohibited, except during tests and tournaments, and for that to happen, a teacher must be present. If they ever violate the rule, such a student will be expelled. Realizing that randomly picking up fights can get him expelled, Neil laughs and admits it'll be a hassle, so he picks up his axe and declares their fight is on hold. Before leaving, he tells Louis to wait for him. Right after, the teacher dismisses everyone and he informs them that their lectures begin the following day. Confused, Lewis wonders why Neil wants to pick a fight with him, so Kane blames Faye for it, calling her a musclehead. She immediately attacks him for almost getting himself and Lewis expelled. Then she apologizes to Louis, confessing that it's her fault because she fought Neil in the final exams. Back then, they ended up in a tie due to time running out, but because Neil heard that Faye had lost to Lewis, ever since he's been dying to fight him. Thankfully, Lewis didn't react earlier when Neil had taunted him. If not, Faye would have felt bad if he got expelled. Within seconds, Kane pulls Lewis away and notes that they are hated by the other students. Later that day at the academy shop, Louis nearly freaks out after noticing how expensive the items sold there are. The attendant tries to sell him pillows ranging from a lot of silver coins to gold coins, and it has the poor boy calculating how valuable coins are spent meagerly in the academy. To his surprise, Kane tells him that the products aren't expensive, and that's where Louis will be buying his daily necessities. The sudden realization makes Louis learn how important coins and credits are. The miser buys the cheapest starter kit, then he thanks his stars for making money from selling cologne. He also plans to send the rest of the funds to the orphanage. After observing the sets of goods being sold at the shop, Louis notes that he has to figure out other means to earn money. As the girls head to their dormitory, Faye bids them farewell and tells Louis that she'll show up for his magic awakening ceremony the following day. He sees them carrying coolers and is drawn to the objects, so he vows to work harder to earn more money to afford them. Later at the dormitory, Louis goes to his room and hopes he isn't stuck with a schemer for a roommate. As he's about to enter the room, he sees a person's pillow and futon thrown outside the room, so he looks inside and sees about being bullied by nobles. They angrily yell at the student, but the boy remains silent, so one of them grabs him by the collar, but Louis touches a vital point in the bully's hand. The bully gets shocked from the effect, and as Louis reminds them that duels are forbidden, the noble with the injured hand defends himself, saying they didn't do anything. He then tries to attack Louis for causing him pain, but Louis strikes the boy's palm, and the nerves control the bully's hand, which crashes on his lackey's face. Louis then asks them when he hit anyone, and they are confused, so he strikes the bully's vital point on the foot, and the boy ends up kicking another lackey. While the bully tries figuring out what's happening, Louis strikes him one last time, and the boy's body falls on his friends. The brat puts two and two together, and he realizes that it's all Louis is doing, but Louis denies it. The boy insists, saying it's Louis who is controlling his body, and he calls Louis a monster. Louis glares at him, and the boy shivers in his boots. Luckily, the short, quiet student stops Louis from pushing the matter further. Louis then suggests reporting to the principal if the bullies have any problems, and they immediately bolt away, yelling that he'll pay for humiliating them. After they leave, Louis introduces himself to Kara, and he learns Kara's name from the futon the boy picks up. Louis tries talking to Kara, but the boy ignores him and goes inside. Louis isn't offended, as he realizes that Kara is beyond shy, so he arranges the room and hopes nothing crazy happens at the ritual happening the following day. Meanwhile, not too far from the goddess's statue, some groups of people set up a trap. The following day at the goddess's temple, the freshmen who show up to awaken their magic stare at the gigantic statue of Gaia, the goddess of their world. The instructor then narrates how Gaia had one time created the world for humans and monsters to coexist, but monsters began to wield their overwhelming power, conquering the sky, land, and sea. Because of this, the brutal power struggle between them bathed the world in their blood, and humans were not exempt from the chaos. This pissed Gaia, so she bestowed her blessings upon the humans who lacked magical power, and they comprehended the four elements of the world. From that, they established the martial arcane, and after several battles, they defeated their foes and became the new rulers of the world. The instructor then informs the students that they too will receive the blessings of the goddess and awaken magic. After listening to his story, Louis looks stern, and he notes that the instructor didn't mention the first hero. Kara notices him, but they are suddenly called by the instructor, and he tells them to follow him. The man takes them to specific tiles and instructs them to sit on them, because if they have talent for magic, they'll sense the elements. But if they don't, then the academy does not need them. The man says all that while glaring at Louis, and moments later, he instructs the others to sit. Louis noticed the instructor's glare, and it made him wonder if the man hates him. Once everyone is seated, the instructor tells them how the four elements are the foundation of their world, and to grasp them, they should sharpen their minds. With that, he begins the chant, and the next thing, the elemental symbols light up the statue, and it amazes the students who see a giant avatar of the goddess floating in space with multiple elemental bubbles scattered around her. As they concentrate, many students are bestowed one of the four elements. Some rejoice while some complain because the element they got didn't suit their proposed career path. Suddenly, Neil is surrounded by a flame vortex from two elements, and everyone is surprised that he's got both earth and fire attributes. At this point, they wonder if Neil is a genius for commanding both elements to his bidding. Excited, the muscle head ignites his flames and rejoices, while ordering the elements to obey him. He then glances over at Louis and declares that if Louis can't awaken, then he isn't his rival, so he says Louis shouldn't disappoint him. The others follow his line of sight, and they expect Louis to also shock them. But they see that there aren't any elements around Louis. The poor boy, on the other hand, concentrates very hard, and he wonders why he isn't sending anything. At first, he wonders if it's because he isn't from this world. But then he recalls sensing a little strange power when he sparred with Cain. Right now, Louis feels like his mind is being polluted, so he declares that his will won't break that easily. The boy screams and shatters the mental bind, smoldering his thoughts. Immediately, 4 colors of light gather around him, and this stuns the instructor because he remembers setting up a magic circle on the tile Louis sits on to sever the boy's mind from the outside. Louis then tries to touch one of the colors of light, but it flees from him. He then tries over and over to catch them, but fails at it. Confused, the boy wonders why he can sense them but cannot touch them. The instructor, who is still observing him, smirks while noting that Louis is dead wrong if he thinks escaping from the mental barrier is enough for him to awaken. The dubious man mentions how the confinement circle and the magic forbidden orb are what he used for Louis because there were people who wanted Louis crushed. And since they paid the instructor for it, he can't back down, so he waits for the ritual to end so that Louis can despair. After several hours, other students take their leave, but Louis and Kara are still meditating, so the nobles make fun of Louis and call him a letdown. Kara, on the other hand, senses something is wrong, so he informs Louis that there's a trap beneath his tiles. Without wasting time, Louis smashes the tile open, and he sees the magic forbidden orb directly under it. Confused, he wonders what the orb is, but Kara, who is on his way out, tells Louis to hurry up. Even though Louis is curious, he steps away from the broken tiles and concentrates. And in that moment, the students still left in the temple are surprised when they see the 4 colors of light forming a vortex around Louis. Surprised, the instructor wonders how Louis was able to awaken because even a master shouldn't be able to break through the confinement circle and the magic forbidden orb. The man then tries to act, but out of nowhere, Principal Aronian shows up and tells him to stand down. The other students who didn't see Louis awaken are surprised to see the principal, so they conclude he came to check on Louis, who had been struggling to awaken. Some even wonder if there's some secret between Louis and the principal. As the instructor watches Aronian walk away, he curses under his breath because their plan got foiled and nearly exposed due to the principal showing up. So later that evening, he meets with Jess and informs him that their plan has failed. Also, to be on the safe side, the instructor warns Jess not to contact him for the time being. All Jess can do is cuss Louis for getting away. Meanwhile, in the temple, Aronian contacts Kylie to keep watching Sid's movements because he doesn't want outsiders wreaking havoc in their academy. After getting rid of the obstacle, Aronian watches Louis and leaves the boy to figure out how to manipulate the elements on his own. Louis, on the other hand, observes the balls of light and notes that they are just like Cain had described. Back then, when Cain was educating him on the elements, Louis learned that the reason why monsters could use elements from birth, unlike humans who needed to awaken, was that they have magic crystals in them. Each crystal contains different elemental powers, and this is why these monsters could control different elements. As for humans, they perform the awakening ritual after being approached by an element, and they can't use magic unless they manipulate the surrounding elements. Cain tossed a magic crystal at Louis while explaining that one needed to train their mind and body right after being recognized by the element. Curious, Louis asked if the magic crystals were the elements, but Cain informed him that everything in the world is made up of elements. When Louis opens his eyes, he sees the water element approaching him, so he tries touching it. This time around, the particle doesn't avoid him, and when Louis makes contact with it, he feels the immense surge of power of the sea beasts, and learns that the essence of the world manifests by the will of Gaia. The vortex surrounding Louis starts spiraling out of control. So Aronian, who is watching him closely, immediately activates the goddess barrier seal, and this makes the goddess trap Louis in a barrier that comprises the 4 elements. Immediately, Louis's hair dye fades away, leaving his black hair exposed. Thankfully, the barrier produces a bright light that prevents the shocked students from seeing Louis. All they are concerned about is why he produced such a huge magical wave and why the principal decided to seal him. While maintaining the barrier, Aronian yells at Louis to calm down and not be swayed by his surroundings. Louis hears Aronian's words and finally calms down. This time around, he observes the elements and realizes that they are awfully similar to the elementary particles in science. So he tests his theory by changing their frequency, and in that instant, the ball of light erupts and the elements showcase their symbols. Just then, the vortex spirals greatly, and it has Aronian and the students around worried to the point that they admit that Louis' aura is far more terrifying than Neil's. Noticing that Louis isn't going out of control, Aronian commends him for exceeding his imagination. While closely observing the elements, Louis concludes that magical essence is the same as that of elementary particles, and thanks to that, it means humans might be able to use magic as easily as monsters. With that, he absorbs the element and notes that just like elementary particles, they are constantly in motion, which means that by harmonizing their movement with the flow of qi and breathing, the circulation of the elements becomes smoother. And if that's the case, Louis might be able to create a magic crystal in his body and use magic like qigong techniques. Louis concentrates hard, and a crystal shape forms in his eye. Immediately, ice crystals grow around him, and the barrier used to house him shatters into pieces. Aronian is stunned by Louis's ability, and he smiles as he watches Louis fly into the air by manipulating wind magic. The other students witnessing the scene run for their lives and cry for help as ice crystals rapidly erupt behind them till they are eventually frozen to the bone.